Dogbert, and the Masters of Marvel Strike Force. I am Dogbert, player of Marvel Strike Force, and this is my credit card, which is soon to be maxed. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me when I whipped out my credit card and said, "By the power of MasterCard, I bought the offer!" And my credit card became maxed, and I became Dogbert, Whale of Marvel Strike Force and Master of the Arena. Hello and welcome, I am Dogbert here to talk about ISO-8 today, how to judge and determine what ISO-8 to put on whom. And all this can vary between different game modes, who you're going against, so keep all that in mind. I'll be using Blue ISO 3 as a general base, because that is pretty easy to get nowadays. Blue ISO 4 is the bottleneck currently, but I expect within the next few months, beginning of the year, that we'll see Blue ISO 4 more readily available. They are slowly making it more readily available, and because they need to give us Blue ISO 4 by then, because how else are they going to sell us Blue ISO 5? You can't go to Blue ISO 5 without Blue ISO 4. You know they're going to want to push that. So, before we move on, I want to say, yes, I'm in the path of the hurricane that is coming for Florida, and I hope that anybody else who is also in the path is staying safe, evacuating if you're in one of the evacuation zones, getting away from pretty much any kind of body of water as possible. And speaking of water, have enough water. You can just use old milk jugs, just store water and freeze it. You never know if you need it. I mean, worst case scenario, you don't use it. Well, you have the water for something else later. So, if I disappear for a few days, it's because I'm without power and internet. Hopefully nothing else. Everybody else stay safe, and hopefully we all get through this with no problem. Now, moving on. So, what you need to think about when you look at a character to determine their ISO 8. Well, you got to think about what is the character's job. Is their job to do damage? Is it to apply debuffs? Is it to protect people? Is it to heal people? Those are all the things you have to think about. For instance, like Icarus, his job, do damage. Is it to control people with debuffs? Like a Morgan Le Fay. That's why we put Skrimisher on her, plus the whole focus resistance thing. But even, you have like a Cersei who wants to control people, put debuffs on them. Things like that. That's why we had Emma. We have Emma as Skirmisher as well. She's another good example. Got to apply those debuffs, right, and at least try to get a chance. Now, another good character as example of that is Zemo. Originally, we wanted him critting because we were running him with X Factor, so we wanted the crit with Raider. But as time moved on, we needed him to ability block, so that meant Skirmisher for the more focus. So things like that. You also have to think, is there anything special in their kit that would call this out? Gambit, for instance, calls out extra crit because you want him to crit to apply evades. Another one is Ghost Spider, because on crit, she can apply that ability block with her special. And using Raider, you can get it up to a 100% crit chance, meaning she's always going to apply that ability block. So things like that is what you want to look for, and just think that through when it comes time to apply an ISO for whatever situation you're in. And how does the character interact with their team? A great example of this is the Young Avengers. Due to Ms. Marvel assisting them all, that's why you put Skirmisher on Ms. Marvel and Stryker on all the rest to get that triple tap because of that Stryker-Skirmisher interaction when you do things like that. So you got to think about how they all work together and what ISO would make more sense on that particular character given their particular job with their particular kit inside the team. You get the idea. So let's talk about what are the different ISO classes. Well, we'll start off with the least useful one of all. That is Fortifier, but we're also going to go into what the future holds with Blue ISO 5 because it does actually make things more interesting. So on spawn, it's going to barrier to self for 45,000 plus 5% of the character's max health, and on every turn they'll get 2 turns of minor defense up, which is 25% resistance and 25% less damage incoming, as compared to regular defense up, which is 50% for both of those. One thing to note though, barrier is limited to 30% of a character's max health, except for Darkhold in the arena where it can go up to 60%. They have a special call out for that. They're the only exception to the rule that I can think of. But in the future, we also have, let's look at ISO Blue 5. Now, the only character I can recommend right now for Fortifier is Spider Weaver. And that's because her unique kit with the damage based off of her health pool, protecting her health pool to keep her at high health, is very important. That's where the barrier comes in. If the barrier is taking damage, her health pool isn't. And it makes her survive. That would be the other reason why you use Fortifier, is you need a character just to survive. But at ISO Blue 5, Fortifier gets interesting in that you get a 40% drain. That's quite a bit of heal if you do quite a bit of damage. Plus you get an extra 10% max barrier, so instead of 30%, it's going to go to 40%. Whether this will be enough to make Fortifier somewhat useful, we'll have to wait and see. But you also get 20% max damage. So this is going to be very interesting once we get to Blue ISO 5. Moving on, we have Healer. Now, Healer on turn applies a regeneration to the most injured ally plus heals for 5% of this character's max health. This is why we had bigger characters who had bigger health point pools become healers, is because 5% of their big hit point pool was quite a bit of a heal whenever they took a turn. But the other thing you got to remember with Healer is also on hit, if the target is vulnerable, they clear a bleed for the most injured ally as well, if they have any. And they also increases active healing by 35%. The active healing being like abilities that actually heal, not percent-based stealing health like Minerva. More like a Maria Hill would be a good example of somebody who heals, and you would get increased healing for that. Or Night Nurse would be another one. So those are things to keep in mind when you're looking at putting a healer ISO. Now sometimes we have to throw healer ISO on for like Scourges just because we need our characters just to get healed up somewhat, and we can't really heal them any other way. So that comes into play too. But in the future, at ISO Blue 5, it gets really interesting in that we're going to have on primary hit. So in other words, if you actually attack, instead of doing like a Mr. Sinister type heal, Emma with her cleanse, something that doesn't attack, you won't get this. But if you actually attack, you get to apply another regeneration to the most injured ally, which may not be the same ally because you healed up the first one originally on turn, and you get to heal for another 5% of the character's max health. This could be quite interesting on, say, like a character like Hulk, who can take a lot of turns if he starts dropping down below 50%. It's going to be very interesting, especially, like I said, Hulk is a character we have to take to Blue ISO 5 for Apocalypse eventually. And of course, you gain 20% max damage. Healer is looking very interesting in the future. As far as Raider, this is probably the most bleh at ISO Blue 3, because all it did at ISO Blue 3 is give it a 20% chance to bonus attack for 30% piercing plus apply an extra vulnerable. Now, on crit, it will apply a vulnerable to anybody it hits. This is why we tend to look at characters who have AoE abilities constantly hitting multiple targets for Raider, or the big thing is the bottom two lines here, the 30% crit chance and 20% crit damage. If we need a character to crit a lot, we want to increase that chance by 30%, or if the character is already critting a lot, we want the extra crit damage. Good examples are Gambit, Thor. Their targets, they have increased crit chance on some of their abilities, and then on top of that, because they're critting, you want them to do even more damage, and they're big damage dealers like that. In the future, at ISO Blue 5, well, you get an extra 20% to bonus attack, so that's going to go from 20 to 40% with this extra 20%, and the 30% extra piercing, so it's going to go up to 60%, and it can go up to a vulnerable. It can apply vulnerables to a maximum of 5. It still doesn't look too amazing, at least on paper, but we have enough characters that do AoE damage that will be using this, and of course we gain 20% more damage. As for his Striker, now we're getting to the two most popular ones. Everybody concentrates on the primary hit, make a bonus attack of 100%. Now that it's based off the basic attack, but it's not always the same. You have to go out to msf.gg to see what the actual ISO attack does, because it's not always the same. And it also clears a vulnerable. Now, There might be situations where you don't want to run Striker because of clearing that vulnerable. You might want that vulnerable on, as we'll see with Skirmisher, what it does. And don't forget, a character that has a vulnerable also takes 10% max damage, 10% more damage, I should say, from any damage source. So yes, you might be getting this nice little ISO attack, but you might be giving up something else in 10% more damage to that character from the rest of the team. So you got to consider that weight too. But the thing with Striker is not just this bonus attack. Also, if it has 2 more vulnerable, it deals 5% of the character's max health to the primary target. But the last line here is actually the key, is it gives 20% damage to whatever character. This is great for any character who applies bleeds, because now they're going to be 20% more effective. This is why Adam Warlock, the preferred one, is Striker, depending on the situation. While I'm running Red Hulk as this 20% more damage, he counterattacks a lot as well. That means that counterattack is going to hit back for another 20% damage. All his attacks are going to hit for 20% more damage, plus he applies those bleeds if he gets his battlefield effect out there. So there's a lot more to it than just clearing a vulnerable and getting a bonus attack, which is quite nice. But really the main thing is 20% more damage. In the future, it looks like it might actually become really broken in that it's going to deal 10% max health and heals for 50% of the damage dealt. That could be quite huge, because generally strikers are doing a lot of damage in the first place, and now they're going to heal themselves for 50% of that damage. This is going to be very interesting, and they get another 20% damage on top of this. Striker might become our go-to ISO once we get to blue ISO-5 because of how much damage he's going to be putting out. And finally, last but not least, one that I think is the most powerful right now, Skirmisher. Now, we all know about the bottom line here, about 50% focus. That's the main reason why we'd like to go to Skirmisher, because we have all these focus and resistance checks, thanks to Darkhold being getting absolutely ridiculous with the resistance. That's why we have to run a whole lot of Skirmishers. But also, the big thing with Skirmisher, the reason why I love it, is on primary hit it applies 2 vulnerables, which is good. But if they already have a vulnerable, it clears 2 positive effects. This is absolutely fantastic for getting rid of offense up, getting rid of death proof, getting rid of taunt, get around all those nasty, annoying defense ups. This attack will clear it, plus you get 50% focus for that as well to help clear, because it's on top of the 50% bonus you get on that, but it's only for the clearing of the buffs. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, don't forget, a Skirmisher also gets 10% damage on assist. This is why we run the Axemen with a whole lot of Skirmishers, because they like to assist each other. And now they're going to do 10% more damage whenever they assist. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If the character is being called to assist, you're probably going to want a Skirmisher on them too. And on top of that is putting the vulnerables out there. That's how we get those triple taps from Ms. Marvel. And in the future, blue ISO-5 on primary hit is going to flip that positive effect into a bleed. Instead of clearing it, taunt becomes bleed, death root becomes bleed, etc. And of course, we get 20% max damage again. So the future looks very interesting. There's some things we need to think about for the future when we talk about ISOs, especially when we start talking about ISO Blue 4. We have to keep ISO Blue 5 in mind, because any character going to 4 is probably going to get 5 in the future as well. So those are all things we need to think about, and I hope this video is helpful and informative. And again, to anybody who else is in Florida like me, stay safe. And until next time, everybody.